Hey guys, moving forward with our notes on measuring the economy here today. I'm gonna try to go through these a little faster than what I normally do to not waste your time too much. So we're talking GDP today, which is short for gross domestic product, and in layman's terms, why GDP is important is it measures how much stuff we produce. Okay, now there's some adjustments you can kind of see here that we have like nominal GDP, real GDP. Those are things adjusted for inflation. Don't worry about that so much because what the government's going to, or what the stats going to tell us every single year is how much our GDP grows. Okay. Now, what you got to understand is GDP here, we're going to talk is how much we produce. All right. And we get paid for producing stuff. And so GDP is extremely closely related to income for people. And so if I can understand that what I produce, I earn an income. If our country's GDP increases, we can assume that people are making more money. Okay. And so, we like to look at GDP growth as a percent. We like to grow somewhere between about 1.5 to 3 to 4%. We don't want to grow too fast. That causes inflation. We don't necessarily want to do that too quickly. All right. The next thing we want to do is understand what the stat tells us, okay, and what the stat doesn't tell us. And so every country comes from different situations. And so, for example, if we were comparing Concord versus, let's just say, Penn, and the only way that we compared the two schools was by how many kids passed an AP test. Okay, and Concord had 100 kids pass an AP test, but Penn had 125 kids pass an AP test. Which school's AP program is better? If you realize that Penn has about twice as many kids as what Concord has, you should say, well, Concord's better. They have a higher percentage of kids do things. And so this per capita GDP kind of tells us a little bit more to the story. So, first of all, this is a list of total GDP from countries. So you can see that actually number one in the world is China. Okay. And they produce $27 trillion worth of stuff. We're about $7 trillion behind. Okay. And you can see that we're ahead of a bunch of other countries. Now, some people would say, oh, China's way better than us. Well, remember, China has about 4 times as many people as us. And so they should produce more stuff than us. And if you look at the per capita GDP, we are actually not number one, but we are number 10. We do pretty well. And then China's down here towards about 67. And if you take the average, if you take per capita GDP and call it like the average salary, which is kind of one way you can look at it, China is averaging about $21,000 a year, which is about a $10 an hour job. Okay, so the average person in China making about $10 an hour. If you wanted to compare it to the United States, where the average person, if you take 67,000 up here, is about 32. I'm sorry, is about a $32 an hour job. Okay, so anyway, that's a stat you want to be able to understand. Moving forward here, how we figure this out, and this is important. It's going to be, we're looking at the price of everything that's produced within a country during a period of time. And so that doesn't necessarily mean things that are bought, okay, which is going to lead to an inaccuracy of could lead to an inaccuracy of things if we work too fast. 1928 we did that. And in 1928 we produced everything so fast our GDP was awesome, but in 1929 nobody bought it. So we didn't produce more stuff, and we see an economic crash leading into the Great Depression. It doesn't happen the same way today because everything's ordered on demand and everything's ordered online, and companies know that they need to produce to order, okay, rather than overproduce and fear that nobody buys things. 1928's problem was that we had all these new consumer goods, irons, refrigerators, radios, toasters, and all these washing machines and all this stuff that people were rushing to buy. Well, when people were rushing to buy it, companies rushed to produce it. Well, eventually everybody had one of those things. You don't need two toasters in your house. You don't need two washing machines in your house. You don't need two. Some people have two refrigerators now, but not at the time. And so all of a sudden, everybody had bought everything, and companies were basically overstocked. And so they didn't need to hire people back in 1929, 1930. And we see this mess of no profit making. Think about the stock market crashing. those are some of the things that are challenges of measuring GDP. It's a little more accurate today, obviously, with technology and knowing what people are buying. So, another thing that's important to understand is that there's three main entities that go into what causes GDP to grow. First of all, you and I buying stuff. We are households. Second, businesses buy stuff just like you and I. They buy bulldozers. They build buildings, whatever, a little bit different purchases. And also the government can buy stuff to add to the GDP. So you might say, well, if the GDP is bad, well, why doesn't the government just buy more stuff? Well, we're going to talk government debt a little bit later on, but the government can influence GDP. This was FDR's plan in uh, the Great Depression. His New Deal was, hey, the government can buy stuff, and the government can increase this GDP, give people jobs, give people incomes, and that was his idea to try to spur economic growth. Right now, the government is sending out those stimulus checks, right? That doesn't quite add to the GDP, but you spending that stimulus check is going to add to the GDP. So the government can control it a little bit, not control, I shouldn't say. The government can influence it a little bit depending on what they do. Okay, and so when they buy stuff like airplanes for the military and any other type of things they might buy, when they build a road, they're giving people jobs. That adds to the GDP. So I've kind of mentioned some reasons it's not perfect. We can't keep track of volunteer work. Volunteer firefighters. They make our lives safer. They make our lives better. Okay, we can't add to that. So GDP is not the only indicator of how good an economy is. It can't keep track of informal exchanges. You guys that mow lawns or babysit, that GDP doesn't get added in there because you're probably not claiming taxes on getting paid at $25 for mowing a lawn or doing whatever you're doing, right? Um, if a country wants to, you know, just produce as much as possible, or in the case of the United States, when we had Hurricane Katrina that destroyed New Orleans, that was wonderful for Elkhart. It raised Elkhart's GDP a ton because the government bought temporary housing trailers that we sent down there. So our GDP is good. Standard of living in New Orleans is not good. If we want to focus only on producing stuff and not necessarily conserving the environment, we could cut down the rainforest and make a whole ton of money. We could catch every crab in the Bering Sea if you've seen Deadliest Catch, and not have crabs come back the next year. We can pollute and pollute and pollute, and that obviously is not going to end well. So, it doesn't take into account some of those things that the quality of life that we might get from limiting that stuff. Leisure time we value. We could work longer hours. We could make more money. That's not necessarily how we want to live. And it doesn't say who gets the money. If one person becomes really rich and the poor are really poor, that's probably not really good for a society either. All right. So countries with good GDP growth and sustained GDP growth, usually we see higher literacy, higher education, higher health and life expectancy. They live longer. We got better healthcare facilities. And it increases that standard of living. So some of those things of standard of living that would be included in those things are listed there. Okay. I have no assignment in regarding GDP for you today, but let's check your stocks. Just email me if you are going to say three things. Total value. Is it up or down from last time? What you did today, buy, sell, stood still, and didn't do anything. Okay, and why? Okay, so pretty easy, won't take you very long. Thanks for checking in today. We will talk to you guys on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend. Hopefully the rain holds off.